What if you still believe in God, but don't belong anywhere? No church, no label, just questions, quiet prayers, and a faith that doesn't fit the rules. In a world that says you must choose a side to be counted, what if your truth lies in between? This video explores the silent struggle of those who believe deeply but walk alone. It's more common than you think. In a time where faith often comes with expectations, traditions, and pressure to conform, what happens when your belief doesn't fit the mold? When you still feel connected to something greater, but don't feel at home in any religious group? Today, on Access Mind, we explore the quiet, honest journey of those who believe without belonging. If this resonates with you, or makes you think in a new way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because questions deserve a voice, and that voice starts here. She doesn't call herself religious anymore, but every night before she sleeps, she still lights a candle and whispers a prayer for her brother, for peace, for something she can't quite name. In a quiet suburb of Texas where church bells once set the rhythm of the week, she now finds silence more sacred than sermons. She's not alone. Across America, more and more people are stepping away from organized religion, not because they've lost faith, but because they're looking for it in places where doctrine doesn't reach. Psychologists suggest it's not rebellion, it's evolution. Carl Jung once said that the human soul needs myth and symbol, that without them, we wander rootless. But in a world where religion has become entangled with politics, power, and control, many feel those symbols no longer speak for them.
Sociologists call this group the nuns, not because they believe in nothing, but because no box fits. Some meditate, some chant, some watch the sunrise and feel it's a form of worship. There's still awe, there's still surrender, but it's personal now, intimate. Neuroscientists have even mapped how prayer, even without religion, calms the amygdala, eases anxiety, and creates a feeling of connectedness. It's not always about a God in the sky. Sometimes it's about a presence in the heart. And when systems fail, when churches turn away the hurting or divide in the name of belief, many quietly choose to walk alone, carrying their faith like a flame in cupped hands, as if they're searching not for answers, but for something real, something that doesn't need to be proven, just felt, like grief, like love, like God without the label. She once stood behind a pulpit, guiding others through scripture and hymns. Now she kneels in tall grass with a camera, waiting for wild horses to appear on the horizon. She says she's never felt closer to God, not in stained glass light or polished pews, but in the hush before sunrise on the open plains. And again, it's not abandonment, it's return. Return to something older than churches. Before sermons and creeds, humans looked to the sky, the wind, the trees, and felt something watching back. For many today, that feeling hasn't left. It's just moved outside the buildings, into the forests, the deserts, the oceans. In Colorado, groups gather before dawn, not to sing hymns, but to sit still on mountaintops, breathing in the cold and calling it prayer. They say the mountains listen, that the sun teaches patience, that God, if anywhere, is here. Carl Jung believed nature was the unconscious mind turned outward, a mirror of the soul. And in a society flooded with noise, people are learning to hear again. Birds, leaves, breath. Spirituality uncoached, unclaimed. Even science quietly agrees. Studies show people who spend time in nature report a greater sense of purpose, empathy, and awe, feelings long associated with religious experience.
And perhaps the divine never needed walls at all. Perhaps it always spoke through rivers and wind and the eyes of a wild animal pausing to meet your gaze. For those like her, it's no longer about reciting the right words or standing in the right place. It's about presence, about feeling small yet not forgotten. And when asked if she still believes in God, she smiles gently and looks at the sky, as if the answer isn't meant to be spoken, just shared. He still reads the words of Jesus, slowly, like poetry, like something meant to be felt before understood. But he doesn't sit in church anymore, not after the sermons started sounding less like love and more like law. In Florida, where lines between faith and politics blur faster each year, he found himself erased in places that once called him brother, gay, believer, human. But to them, only one of those words mattered. So he walked away, not from Christ, but from the noise around his name. And he's not the only one. Across the country, especially among Gen Z, there's a quiet movement. People reclaiming Jesus without the filters of party lines or power structures. They say they're tired of pulpits that preach division, tired of compassion being conditional. For many, Jesus wasn't about exclusion. He broke bread with the outcast, defended the shamed, forgave the unforgivable. That version of him, the radical, the healer, the rebel, still resonates. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance when beliefs and actions no longer align. And for a generation raised on justice, empathy, and global awareness, watching faith turn political feels like betrayal. Carl Jung once warned of the dangers of institutions replacing inner truth. And in that warning, some find clarity. God doesn't need a campaign. Spirituality, at its core, isn't about control. It's about connection.
He still prays, still helps, still forgives. Not because a preacher says to, but because Jesus did. His Bible has worn pages, his heart still hopeful. And when he's asked if he left religion, he answers softly, "No, I left noise. Not faith, not grace. Not the man who taught us how to love the ones the world forgets." She doesn't fold her hands or kneel. There's no altar, no incense, no priest guiding her words. Just a canvas, a brush, and a quiet murmur that sounds a lot like prayer. In a small Brooklyn apartment filled with color and music and unfinished work, she speaks to God in strokes and silences, not asking for anything, just talking. Like you'd talk to someone who already knows everything, but still wants to hear it from you. Across cities and towns, more people are stepping away from structured faith, not out of rejection, but out of instinct. They light candles not because they were told to, but because it feels right. They write letters to the divine in journals, cry into their palms, sit still long enough to listen. Psychologists call it DIY spirituality, a new kind of faith that lives outside institutions. It's not rebellion, it's return. A return to that ancient idea that maybe the sacred doesn't need translation. Maybe your soul already knows the language. Carl Jung often spoke of the self as the seat of the divine, that to meet God, one must journey inward. And that's what they're doing, these artists, thinkers, wanderers, finding sacred moments in the ordinary, in music, in cooking, in silence, not waiting for permission or a middleman to speak to what's eternal. Science, too, notes how such practices reduce stress, build resilience, and foster a deeper sense of meaning, qualities once reserved for temples and churches. She doesn't claim to have all the answers, but her heart feels heard. Her prayers, though unspoken, feel received. And in that studio, with hands stained and eyes wide, she believes maybe that's all that ever mattered. Not where you worship or how, but that you do, in your way, without fear. She still prays every morning, whispering the same words her grandmother once taught her. But she hasn't stepped into a church in years, not since the day silence became complicity and truth was buried to protect the institution. Something inside her shifted that day. Not her belief in God, that remained unshaken, but her belief in those who claimed to speak for him crumbled under the weight of cover-ups and shame. Across the world, stories like hers echo in quiet conversations and online forums. People who once trusted deeply, now walking away with broken hearts and still burning faith. Scandals in religious institutions, from abuse to denial, have left many questioning not the sacred, but the structure that claimed to protect it. And it's not bitterness that drives them, it's betrayal. Because how do you reconcile the words of love with actions of harm? How do you call something holy when it hides the unholy? Psychologists call it moral injury, when your deepest values are violated. And in religion, where the expectations are higher, that injury cuts deeper. Carl Jung believed the shadow must be faced, not ignored. Denying it only gives it more power. Naming it is the first act of healing. She says her faith now lives outside the walls, in the voices of survivors, in stories of strength. Her belief didn't break, but her trust did. And still her prayers continue, more honest now, less filtered, maybe more sacred. He didn't find faith in a chapel. He found it in a 10-minute video at 2 a.m., when his thoughts were too loud and sleep too far. Someone whispered about gratitude, presence, and purpose. No judgment, just truth. And for the first time, he didn't feel preached to, he felt seen. Across his generation, this is becoming the norm. Young people turning to podcasts, TikTok, and YouTube, not for entertainment, but for meaning. They're not looking for perfection. They're looking for resonance. Jay Shetty, Oprah, even anonymous voices on calming accounts are not priests, but to many, they're prophets. Not because they speak for God, but because they speak to the soul. Psychologists say the human mind is wired to seek meaning. When traditional religion fails, people don't stop seeking, they just search elsewhere. Carl Jung believed that modern society had lost its rituals, and in doing so, lost its language for the sacred. But in a strange twist, algorithms are now leading people to what once took years to find. A voice that calms, a message that heals, a story that makes sense of their own. It's not religion in the old sense. It's spiritual companionship across screens, earbuds, comments. And while some may scoff at the idea of influencers as spiritual guides, the impact is real. Because for that teenager, the voice that reminded him he mattered didn't come from a priest, it came from a stranger through a screen. And still, something shifted. Not conversion, not ritual, just belief, quietly blooming, where he never thought it would. He still believes, that hasn't changed, but every time he walks past the campus chapel, something in him hesitates, not out of defiance, just uncertainty. He's been invited to join the faith group more than once. They seem kind, warm, familiar, but every time he almost says yes, something inside him whispers, not yet. Because he's learning that belief and belonging don't always arrive together. and that sometimes the most honest faith is the one you walk alone. In his dorm room, he lights a candle, not because anyone told him to, but because it feels like a way to mark the day. He reads a verse, he meditates, he questions. Sometimes he doubts, but still, he believes. And in the quiet, he wonders, does this count? If I don't show up every Sunday, if I don't wear the label, but I still carry the light, if I believe in grace, in love, in something greater, without the group, the songs, the schedule. Psychologists say identity is layered, that sometimes we crave community but fear losing ourselves in it. Carl Jung once warned that blindly merging with the group can cost the soul its voice. And for many like him, the path isn't rejection, it's discernment. How much of this is mine? How much am I borrowing? And is it okay if faith looks different for me? He still prays, still hopes, still believes in goodness that can't be explained. He just wants to know if it's enough. If this made you think, even for a moment, like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. Because the mind isn't meant to obey blindly. It's meant to wonder, to grow, to ask what others won't. And here at Axis Mind, we don't silence doubt. We begin with it.